The editing team had a fun time with this one, but my god, was this episode an explosion of drama. Hi, hello uglies, welcome back. My name is Chair, and sometimes I don't understand science. This week on Dragula is a challenge that I historically have started to get a little bored by, highkey. I think Monsters of Rock was really fun for a couple of seasons, but I think it lost its luster after we saw it so many times. I was one of the rare few who really appreciated and enjoyed that random musical they did in season 6 because it was a break from Monsters of Rock, even though it was very clear that the ghouls thought they were going to get a rock challenge since they all had rock looks. I just think the challenge has gotten a little too familiar and it's lost some of its excitement for me. But this time was oddly invigorating. Invigorating! And that had a lot to do with the general setup of this entire episode. Not only with its theme, its location choice, but also in a lot of the editing style helped support my excitement for this challenge. On top of all of that, the ghouls were activated this week. There was fighting, there was drama, there was yelling across the room. I was waiting for something to be thrown, whether that be snacks or a drink. The boulets were waiting for it. It didn't, but I was still waiting for it. And I think I've developed a new vocal stim, courtesy of Cynthia Doll. What is decorum? She is such a gift and a joy, and we don't deserve her. This episode begins on a bus leading us to an on-site location. Yo, I loved this so freaking much. The premise of this episode reminded me not only of old seasons of Dragula, where in those early years, they went to a lot of on-site locations. The zombie challenge is one that I think about immediately. There was the battle dome they did in season 2, even going out for the D&D challenge. But it also reminded me of classic Project Runway and classic Top Model. You know those episodes where the contestants would go out to a site, they would just party and have a good time on Top Model, and then the girls would be fighting, or the contestants on Project Runway would go somewhere in particular and have a lunch, only to find out that that area was the theme of their challenge. They had to be inspired by the location and the venue. And it's in these moments where we see a lot of those interpersonal relationships come out. They're a little more free, they're a little more relaxed because they're amongst real human beings. I think they let a lot more of their guard down, where when they're in the cauldron, they are so presently aware that cameras are watching them, sometimes that vulnerable, raw frustration doesn't quite come out. And so I can't express how much joy it brought to see the ghouls just be out somewhere. I was also gagged that they did 2 performance challenges back to back, but I think this was a solid one to do early. I would much rather have this challenge done now rather than way later. That being said, I think it was absolutely criminal that we did not get to see Frankie in this challenge. I think this would have been an opportunity for them to really stand out, especially because the performance from season 1 was something that got so heavily critiqued, and they knew that Frankie had so much more to give. So this would have been a good redemptive opportunity in the same way that I think it was for someone like Jaharia this week. Speaking of which, Frankie is the monster that did not survive the extermination from last challenge. This didn't surprise me that much, and I remember talking a lot last week about how Frankie and Loris were just not in that edit at all. Like, they were invisible. Haumsteva. They're both coming back next week? I can't wait to see how this turns out. Those mild and severe annoyances from last week have boiled over into this week. Cynthia is double pressed that both of her friends said her name to be up for extermination, but somehow ignored the fact that Jay also said her name. And she's now bonded with Jay. Plot twist. I love Cynthia Doll to death, but I love nothing more than her last week coming in saying that she's gotten smarter, and then this week missing an entire opportunity for critical thinking skills. Do I want her fighting with Jay? Absolutely not. But it's funny that Jay also saying her name to be up for extermination seemingly just got ignored or completely unnoticed. That being said, I do feel bad for both Jaharia and Blackberry. They're having to get the brunt of her frustration, and I don't think that's deserved at all. They had to say someone's name, the 2 of them were in the top, so they're not gonna say each other, and Jay did their choreography. It would be a pretty punk move to say Jay's name over Cynthia, and they can't say someone else. And I think all of this frustration that Cynthia is feeling just doesn't have much of a leg to stand on. I did live for the supercut of all the ghouls reacting to the pinky promise. That was camp. And I just know the editors had a great time asking each one of them, how do you feel about a broken pinky promise? getting each one of them to react to it and then super cutting it together. I love when Dragula does these shady edits. It's so funny. And I just hope that this energy output is not a distraction for my Rugrat queen. I need her to lock in, and I need her to dominate the next several challenges. The ghouls are also starting to accuse Sigourney of weaponizing her fan base against them. This hasn't really made the edit, and I didn't really get that implication last week. Maybe these are things that are being said that are being cut from the final product. I'm not in the room, so I have no context of what's actually being said and what's actually being done. The ghouls are saying it, the boulets are saying it, so it must be being said, or at the very least implied. But I do think it's convenient that whenever a woman is perceived as a threat, a million accusations start to get thrown around, created to push her down. Convenient. Do I think Sigourney is a diva with a capital D? Absolutely. But so are half of the cis male contestants in this cast. A bunch of these ghoulies act like their shit don't stink, and then they want to accuse Sigourney of being that. Interesting. Like, no one is trying to drag down any of these cis males like they are to this lady. That's all I'm saying. Dahlia is still going after Jade and like a quarter of the cast. And we get a bombshell reveal later that she is sneaking around to production, telling them things, trying to get people in trouble, stirring up drama, stirring the pot, and all of that's gonna get back to the ghouls. She is tattling to producers about things that she has no business sticking her nose into. She's still accusing Jade of excessively drinking, which I gotta say, I have been just vocal stimming because I was drunk at rehearsal. Nonstop, it's so funny. And we later learned that Jade's room was even searched by production because they were looking for extra bottles, thinking that she's just drinking up a storm while she's home. Dahlia also went to production to try and get Zava in trouble. Like, what the F? I understand her logic and reasoning after it was explained in the cauldron, but if she didn't understand the context of the situation, she shouldn't have gone and run her mouth until she did. I'm not here to take anybody's sides because, again, I wasn't in the room. But what I will say is that Dahlia's energy, I can't explain it, is giving trad wife. I'm not connecting with that. I get that they're there to do a job, and I understand that she wants them all to be professional as best as they can in order to do that job. But being a snitch to try and get others in trouble, potentially even eliminated, I don't think is the high road that Dahlia thinks it might be. This whole episode was such top model vibes with all of that infighting, all of the drama, juxtapositioned with these gratuitous shots of people having a good time, people exploring an environment for the first time. For their main challenge, the ghouls have to create a part rave, part cyberpunk nightmare look, and then present that on a stage while performing in small groups to a rock song. It seems like it's in the wheelhouse of a lot of these ghouls, and I was kind of surprised at the direction most of them took. Each of these teams, I think from what we saw, worked decently well together. But pre-show, there was even more drama between Cynthia and Blackberry, where Cynthia is just yelling across the room, throwing more accusations at Blackberry, accusing her of not being a friend, and being really harsh. At this point, I honestly can't tell how much of this frustration is manufactured and how much of it is genuine. Like, is Cynthia really this upset at someone she calls a former friend, or is she just aware that cameras are watching and is hamming it up? She claims that both Blackberry and Jaharia have lost a friend and an ally in the competition. And I can't tell if this is tea or TV. You see what I did there? Okay, I thought it was funny. Her stepping into the porta potty to finish her makeup was such an excellent callback, and it had me looking at the screen going, yes! I love the Boulets look for the floor show this week. My god, they looked incredible. Their cyberpunk suits with those Tron-like helmets were exquisite. And I love that they actually matched the theme of the challenge this week, because normally we don't see the Boulets totally on theme. They're usually doing something that's cool and interesting, but not always following the line that the monsters are. From the blended cut of the performances we saw, I had a couple of standouts. That being JK, who just was so hot and powerful on that stage, but also Jaharia. And they looked hot. Like, I loved those looks endlessly. Personally, I thought that Abora looked kind of lost in her role. I think that extra part was such a throwaway for Abora. I think they were confused on what they were supposed to do, so they just had Abora there. I think whatever the Boulets saw live did not translate well to the edit, because to me, Abora just looked like they were standing around, and that's it. There. Again, I wasn't there. It didn't excite me. Also, the Boulets were living for several of the drummers, and I was confusion. Blackberry, Eva, and Cynthia were utterly unconvincing to me. I think they were emoting for the purpose of the audience seeing them, so big movements to make it look like they were really performing, but the camera is capturing aerial shots where we can see those sticks not connecting with the drums. It looked lifeless, at least from the above shots. I'm sure it looked great from an audience perspective and it looked like it was really happening, but we're seeing the televised portion of it. And so I wasn't convinced those were all bottom rolls for me. I wanted to see a little more performance. I wanted to see a little more fake realness. The performances that the Boulets saw in the moment were very clearly better than what the edit showcased, because almost every single critique made me scratch my head. Even with Priscilla being low, I thought her eating that cigarette was punk as hell, and it made me love her performance. But there were clearly extended parts that we didn't see, parts where she wasn't doing well, that they did not connect with and therefore put her in the bottom for it. But the edit was very kind towards Priscilla's performance. And I think this was overall a scenario where the editors were kind to everyone, specifically in how those performances looked, but that clearly was not symbiotic with what actually happened in the moment. And so I think for me as an audience member, it confuses me why certain critiques ended up sticking, because that just wasn't my perception. And this isn't necessarily the first time this has happened. I feel like the Dragula editors are always trying to be very kind towards its cast and not make them look bad unless something is really egregious. But I think it leaves some cognitive dissonance for us as viewers trying to piece together why something happened the way that it did when it didn't appear that it was that bad. Jaharia is ultimately the winner of the challenge, which I completely 100% agreed with. I also thought that she could have won last week, so in my Mocha fantasy, she won both challenges. This was such a major redemptive moment for her because if I remember right, she did excellent in that musical in season 6, but kind of got curb stomped by Pi and lost a lot of momentum and energy and just wasn't able to take that win, even though she probably deserved it. And Loris, Jade, and Priscilla are the bottom 3 this week. If you ask me, it should have been Blackberry, Eva, and Jade. I understood why Jade was there. Her performance was weak. Minimal even. But Blackberry and Eva were so unconvincing in their roles, and I also didn't love their outfits, but of course I'm judging from the edit that we saw, not necessarily the live that actually happened. Priscilla is spared from the bottom 2, which I think was the correct decision, leaving both Loris and Jade to approach the gallows for their fate. I like Loris. I remember seeing her at that very first drag con before I even was doing drag. I remember being super inspired by her looks and in my bathroom one day after work, recreating one of her looks that I promptly took off because it looked terrible, and there is no photographic evidence of that, thank God. And I loved their artistry all the way from back when I saw them wandering around at DragCon as this big green tree. I think that was even before Dragula. And so I of course want to see them keep going because I like what Loris does. I like their artistry, but at the same time, Jade is excellent television, and I think the Boulets really want to see more of what she's gonna do. They want someone who's willing to take more risks for the camera, even if they're not providing a lot to the competition like Jade is doing, where Loris is not really doing anything. Loris is just kind of there. And I worry that maybe Loris has this idea in her head that because she's OG, that's gonna carry her to the end because the Boulets are gonna want to see some of that old energy. But the Boulets want to see the best of the best, and Loris is not providing that. Neither is Jade, but last week Loris did say that they volunteered essentially to go home, so I think that was kind of the final nail in the coffin. Or was it? Because in the outro we see both Loris and Frankie getting their morgue drawers? Fridge drawers opened up, and both of them were told to awaken. Are they coming back like Abora did in Titans 1? Is this gonna be a moment where they get to come in and replace someone that's in the competition? We won't know till next week, but what are your thoughts? In my opinion, I think Dahlia's time is slowly running short. Quickly running short, rather. She's causing way too much unnecessary friction, lying to producers, trying to get people kicked out and punished in the competition, which I think is gonna come back and bite her in the butt. And the Boulets recently said in an interview that after this season, there are going to be monsters who we may never see ever in the franchise again. And I fear that might be Dahlia. What did you think of this episode overall? I was pleasantly surprised that Monsters of Rock was such a fun challenge this season because I let out the most exasperated no that you could have ever heard last night when I saw what the challenge challenge was, only to leave it feeling very happy about how it all went. And I think that had a lot to do with the cyberpunk theming and this funky desert setting, the raver background. It was all such a good time, and the edit was a blast and made me enjoy the challenge as a whole. I will be posting a ranking video later on this week, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And if you want to go back and watch my review of last week, as well as the last episode's outfit ranking, there is a playlist on my channel that you can go and explore. Also, it would be a huge help to me if you have the means to join my members only program. I'm a full-time creator, so everything helps keep me here and creating excellent content for y'all. Members get to watch most of my videos a day before everyone else, and it helps support me as a creator. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see y'all on the flip.